My name is Roberto. I'm 58 years old, and I never thought the day would come when I'd ask such a difficult question to people I barely knew. But when you're a father, when you love your son more than anything, you do what needs to be done. So there I was, at the door of that roadside gas station, watching men come and go, trying to find the courage to ask the unthinkable. Who would be brave enough to love my son? Have you ever had that feeling that your life is about to change completely? Because that's exactly what I felt in that moment. My legs shaking, my heart racing, and that voice inside my head telling me I was doing something impossible. But I had no choice. My boy, my Gabriel, just 23 years old, was at home, alone, hiding from the world. And I couldn't watch that anymore. I'll be honest with you. This didn't start there, at that gas station. It started years ago, when Gabriel was still a child. Back in a small town deep in the interior, where we lived in a simple 3-room house with a dirt backyard and an old mango tree that shaded the porch. I worked as a mechanic, hands always covered in grease, coming home tired every day. But Gabriel was always there, waiting for me with that smile. A different kind of boy, everyone saw it. Delicate. Too sensitive. He liked helping his mother in the kitchen instead of playing ball with the other boys. At first I thought it was just a phase, kid stuff. But when he turned 15, 16, it became clearer. The way he walked, talked, and looked at things. Gabriel wasn't like the other boys. And you know what's worse? He knew it. I saw it in his eyes. That constant fear, that shame of being who he was. Because in a small town, in a community like ours, being different is almost a crime. People started to pull away. First, it was the neighbors. Mrs. Maria, who lived next door and always brought us corn cake, stopped coming. When I asked, she'd change the subject, say she was busy. But I knew. Everyone knew. It was because of Gabriel. Because of his way. Then it was the friends from church. We'd attended the local congregation for years. I was even a deacon. Gabriel sang in the children's choir. But when he grew up, when it became clear he wasn't normal like they wanted, things changed. People stopped greeting us properly. They looked at us with pity, with disapproval, as if we had some contagious disease. I swear I tried to make Gabriel fit in. I took him to play soccer with me on Sundays. I bought a new ball called the Neighbors. But Gabriel stayed on the sidelines, awkward, while the other boys ran and shouted. He didn't want to be there, and forcing him to do that was like tearing a piece of him away every day. His mother, Luciana, she saw it all too. But we didn't talk about it. It was like an elephant in the room. Huge, impossible to ignore, but we pretended it wasn't there. Until one day, Gabriel was 17, he came home all beaten up. Black eye, swollen lip, torn shirt. I asked what happened. He just shook his head and locked himself in his room. It was Luciana who told me later. Some boys from school had beaten him. They called him names I can't even repeat. Said he wasn't a real man, that he was a disgrace. And Gabriel didn't fight back, didn't defend himself. He just took it, as if he deserved it all. That night, I stayed awake late, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain outside, thinking about everything. And for the first time in my life, I had to admit a truth that broke my heart. My son was gay, and the world around us wasn't going to accept that. Never. After that day, Gabriel changed. He stopped leaving the house, stopped going to school. He stayed locked in his room, quiet, as if he were becoming invisible. Luciana tried to talk to him, brought him food, but he barely answered. It was as if something inside him had broken. And you know what the most painful part of all this is? I didn't know how to help. I didn't know what to say, because the truth is, I had also been raised believing that it was wrong. That a man had to be a certain way, had to like women, get married, have children. And now my own son was showing me that the world was different from what I thought. I tried to ask for help. I talked to the pastor. He told me it was a sin, that Gabriel needed deliverance, prayer, and fasting, that if we had enough faith, God would change him. I even tried to believe that for a while. I took Gabriel to prayer services, but every time I looked at his face during those prayers, I saw more suffering, more pain. It wasn't helping. It was destroying him even more. That was when I stopped going to church, when I realized that if God is love, He wouldn't want to see my son suffering like that. And if the people who claimed to love God couldn't love Gabriel, then maybe the problem wasn't with him. Maybe the problem was with them. But that didn't solve anything. Gabriel remained at home, hiding. He was 19 and looked like a ghost. He lost weight, stopped smiling, avoided even looking in the mirror. And I, as a father, felt completely powerless, because what I wanted most in the world was to see my son happy. But how do you do that in a place where everyone rejected him? I talked to Luciana one night. She was crying in the kitchen, trying to hide it from me, but I saw. I sat beside her, held her hand, and for the first time, we spoke openly about Gabriel. "He needs someone, Roberto," she said. "He needs someone who truly loves him, someone who isn't afraid of what others will think." "But who?" I asked. "Who in this town would be capable of that?" She shook her head. "No one here. We need to find someone from outside." And that's how I started. I began going out, talking to different people, asking discreetly if they knew anyone. But whenever I tried to broach the subject, people would dodge the question, change the topic, or worse, look at me with pity, as if I were crazy. One day, I spoke with a young man who worked at the market. He was from the city and had moved to our small town a few months before. He seemed more open, more modern. I thought maybe he might understand. But when I mentioned Gabriel, when I suggested that perhaps they could meet, the guy laughed in my face. "Sorry, Mr. Roberto," he said, "but I don't want any trouble. It's already hard enough being who I am here. I don't need more problems." That killed me inside, because I realized it wasn't just about finding someone. It was about finding someone brave enough. Someone who wouldn't fear the judgment, the rejection, the stares. And those people were rare. Very rare. Gabriel turned 23. We threw a small party at home. Just me, Luciana, and him. We lit the candle on the cake, sang happy birthday. But when it came time to blow it out, Gabriel just looked at the candle and cried. And in that moment, I knew I had to do something drastic. Something that might seem like madness to others, but was the only thing I could still try. That was when I decided to go to the truck stop. That roadside station on Highway 116, where truckers stopped to refuel, rest, and eat. Men from all over the country passed through there. Men who didn't know us, who didn't have preconceived notions about Gabriel. Maybe, just maybe, one of them could be the answer. So there I was, Roberto, 58 years old, a mechanic, a desperate father, about to ask strangers the hardest question of my life. I spent the whole day there. I watched every man who climbed down from his truck, trying to guess by his face, by his manner, if he was the right kind of person. Some were too old. Others seemed too rough, too closed off. I wanted someone different, someone special. The sun was setting when I saw him. A big red rig pulled up to the pump. The driver stepped down, a tall, strong man, probably about 35. He had a thick beard, a tattoo on his arm, but his eyes were different. Gentle, calm. He greeted the attendant with a smile, cracked a joke, laughed out loud. He seemed like a good person. My heart raced. Could it be him? Was this the person I was looking for? I took a deep breath, gathered all the courage I had, and started walking toward him. My legs were shaking, my throat was dry, but I couldn't give up now. Not for Gabriel. When I got close, the man looked at me and smiled. "Good evening, sir. Need something?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. How was I going to start this conversation? How was I going to explain everything without sounding completely crazy? But then I thought of Gabriel, of the smile he used to have as a child, of the sadness that had taken hold of him now. And I knew I had to try. "My name is Roberto," I said, extending my hand, "and I have a question for you. It might seem strange, but would you be brave enough to love my son?" The man looked at me, confused, not understanding. But he didn't laugh. He didn't ignore me. He just stood there, looking at me with those calm eyes, waiting for me to explain. And in that moment, in that exact second, something changed. Because for the first time in years, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this man was different. Maybe he was the answer I was looking for. He didn't look away. That was the first thing that surprised me. Everyone else had looked away. That quick, assessing glance, followed by the awkward aversion, the sudden change of subject, any excuse to get away. But not the trucker. His eyes stayed on my son, steady, calm, with no visible judgment. Maybe this one, I thought, feeling that dangerous spark of hope light up in my chest. Maybe this one is different. My son noticed it too. I saw the slight shift in his posture, the way his shoulders stiffened slightly, as if bracing for yet another rejection. He had developed this armor over the months. He expected the pain before it even arrived. The silence stretched for a few more seconds. The kind of silence that feels like an eternity when you're waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. It was the trucker who spoke first. "Do you like coffee?" His voice was deep, raspy from years on the road, but there was something gentle in it, something that didn't match the calloused hands holding the aluminum cup. "Because the coffee here is terrible, but at least it's strong." My son blinked, clearly not expecting that. Yes, I like coffee." "Then sit down, I'll get you a cup." The trucker gestured to the empty chair beside him, then got up and walked to the counter. That was the moment I really looked at him. Not just a quick glance, but truly observing him. He was the type you'd expect to find on the road. Worn jeans, boots showing their mileage, a flannel shirt with sleeves rolled up over muscular forearms. A few days of stubble, hair a bit too long, like someone who goes weeks without a proper place to call home. But there was something else. The way he moved had an efficiency to it, a deliberateness that came from spending most of his life in the cab of a truck. Every movement was purposeful, unhurried, but also without waste. He was the kind of person who knew exactly who he was and didn't apologize for it. When he came back with the cup, he placed it in front of my son with care, as if he were handling something valuable. "Heads up, it's not gourmet. It's gas station coffee, the kind that keeps drivers awake for hours." "Thanks," my son murmured, wrapping his hands around the hot mug. The trucker sat back down, and for a moment they just drank in silence. I was a few yards away, pretending to read a laminated menu I had already memorized. But every fiber of my being was tuned into their conversation. "How long have you guys been on the road?" the trucker asked, casually, as if just making polite conversation. "A few months," my son replied, his voice still cautious. "My dad. He's looking for someone for me." I saw the trucker nod slowly. No overreaction, no surprise. That's a good thing, having a dad who cares like that. He took another sip of coffee. Mine didn't give a damn. I left home at 16 and never went back. That caught my son's attention. For the first time, I saw a genuine glimmer of curiosity on his face. "You didn't have anyone?" "Not in the way that mattered." The trucker looked out the window, at the gas station lights blinking in the night. "I was always the type who didn't fit in very well anywhere, so I decided the road would be my place. Here, you are who you are. No one knows you well enough to judge you." There was something in the way he said that, a kind of weight, an untold story hovering between the lines. My son must have felt it too, because I saw his expression change. The armor didn't drop completely, but a few cracks appeared. "Must be lonely," my son said softly. The trucker gave a crooked smile. "Sometimes, but there's worse than loneliness. There's being surrounded by people and feeling completely invisible. Or even worse, being seen, but not for who you really are." I felt my heart clench. He knew. Somehow this man of the road with his worn clothes and calloused hands understood exactly what my son was going through. "How do you stand it?" my son asked, and there was real vulnerability in the question. "Being alone all the time? It's not just about standing it, it's about choosing." The trucker leaned forward slightly. You can spend your life trying to fit into spaces that were never made for you. Or you can create your own space. It takes longer. It hurts more. But at least it's real. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't uncomfortable or tense. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone says something so true you need a moment to process it. I was watching all this with a mixture of hope and terror. Hope, because, for the first time in months, I saw my son let his guard down. Terror, because I knew what was coming next. There was something he needed to tell. Something that had made everyone else run away. What if this trucker, who seemed so different, so understanding, ran away too? "Can I ask you a question?" my son said suddenly, his voice hesitant. "Sure." "When you said you didn't fit in, did you mean—" He left the question in the air, unable to finish. The trucker didn't answer immediately. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, and for a moment I thought he was going to deflect, change the subject. But then he looked directly at my son. "I meant that everyone has something others don't understand. Something that makes them feel wrong, or different, or out of place." He paused. "And that's spending your life hiding it as a way of dying slowly." I saw tears forming in my son's eyes. He blinked rapidly, trying to hide them, but the trucker saw. Instead of pretending he hadn't seen, he simply slid a paper napkin toward him. "Thank you," my son whispered. "No need to thank me." The trucker leaned back in his chair again. "We all need a napkin every now and then." That broke something in my son. Not completely, but enough. I saw the exact moment he decided to trust a little. "Just a little. You seem like someone who's seen a lot," my son said, discreetly wiping his eyes. 23 years behind the wheel. You see all kinds of people, all kinds of stories." The trucker shrugged. "You learn that the world is much bigger and stranger than anyone imagines when they're stuck in a small town." "And people? Do they surprise you?" "Always. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But they always surprise you." My son took a deep breath. I knew that breath. It was the breath he took before doing something that scared him. "There's something about me," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "Something that most people don't understand, or don't want to understand." The trucker said nothing, just waited. There was no pressure in his silence, just space. Space for my son to fill at his own pace. "My dad is looking for someone for me because nobody in our town wanted me. All of them." He swallowed hard. "They all changed when they found out. Some with pity, some with disgust. But everyone was different." "And what did they find out?" the truck driver asked gently. This was the moment. The moment everything would change. The moment when people always either ran away or stayed, but never looked at him the same way again. I could see my son wrestling with himself, deciding whether to trust or to put up his guard. Finally, he looked directly at the truck driver. "I'm gay." 2 words, just like that. But I saw the whole world shift in that moment. I saw my son release years of tension, of fear, of hiding. I saw his shoulders relax for the first time since he was 15, and understood who he was. And the truck driver? He didn't blink. He didn't get uncomfortable. He didn't look for an excuse to leave. "Okay," he said. "That's it. Okay." And then, something happened that I will never forget. "You know," the trucker continued, looking at the horizon as if choosing his words carefully. "I grew up out here in the country too. Small place. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone has an opinion on other people's lives." He paused. He swirled the coffee cup in his hands. "When I was 18, my best friend came out to me. We grew up together, fished in the same river, learned to drive in the same old truck, and he just stood there, shaking, waiting for me to react. My son was completely still, absorbing every word. And you know what I did? I gave him a hug. Because he was still the same guy he always was. He was just being honest for the first time in his life." The trucker looked straight into my son's eyes. "But the town didn't see it that way. Within 2 weeks, he was gone. Moved to the city, never came back. And I was left thinking, how many times do we lose incredible people just because they have the courage to be who they really are? My son had tears streaming down his face now. Not tears of shame or fear. They were tears of relief, of being seen, of being accepted. That's why when your dad asked that question at the bar, the trucker continued, I didn't hesitate, because I already knew the answer. He wasn't looking for someone brave enough to love his son. He was looking for someone decent enough to accept who his son really is. And that was the moment I broke. You have to understand. I'm a simple countryman. I grew up in a generation where men don't cry, don't show weakness, don't talk about feelings. But there, on that porch, I fell apart. Because for 3 years I carried that alone. For 3 years I watched my son close himself off, hide away, build walls around his heart. For 3 years I walked into bars, asked desperate questions, and received looks of pity or contempt. And in 10 minutes, this man I barely knew did what no one else had done. He saw my son. Really saw him. And he wasn't afraid. I got up from the chair where I was listening to everything, trying to stay invisible, and walked over to them. My legs were shaky. My vision was blurry. You. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out right. You have no idea what this means. The truck driver stood up too, and for the first time, I saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't pity, it was understanding, as if he understood the weight I had been carrying. I do have an idea, he said, placing his hand on my shoulder, because I watched my friend leave, and I watched his father stay silent, not knowing what to do, afraid of what others would think. He squeezed my shoulder. You did it differently. You fought for your son. That is courage, yes, sir. And there, in front of that man and my son, I cried like I hadn't cried since my wife died. I cried out 3 years of despair, of sleepless nights, of unanswered questions. I wept with relief, gratitude, and hope. My son hugged me, and the trucker stood there, respectful, giving us space but not leaving, not abandoning us, not running away. Dad, my son whispered in my ear. It's okay. It's finally okay. And for the first time in 3 years, I believed it. We stayed there for a while. I don't know how long. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky that intense orange you only see in the country. The smell of wet earth from the last rain was still in the air. And for the first time in a long time, this place felt like home again. Eventually, we pulled apart. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. Embarrassed, but not sorry. My son was different. Not totally transformed. These things take time, but there was something new there. A lightness. An openness. So, the trucker said, returning to his chair with that easygoing way of his. What are we fixing for dinner? Because after a conversation like that, we need to eat well. And my son laughed. A real laugh, not that forced laugh he'd been using for the last few years. It was his boyish laugh, the one I hadn't heard in so long. You cook? My son asked, wiping his own tears. Of course. You don't survive on the road without knowing how to make a decent meal, the trucker replied. I bet your dad has some good steaks in there. I can make that garlic rice I learned from a family down south. It's amazing. And just like that, simple as that, we went back inside. Together. I went to get the meat. My son started making the salad, and the trucker took over the stove as if it were his own, commanding that kitchen with the same quiet confidence he had in everything. And while dinner was cooking, while the aroma filled the house, I watched the two of them talking, laughing. My son telling stories about the city, the truck driver responding with his own adventures on the road. It was normal. Naturally normal. Like it should have been all along. That conversation changed everything. When I told Gabriel about the reactions from the community, about those whispers and cruel comments, I thought he would back down, that he would ask to keep hiding, to pretend nothing was real. But he didn't do that. Instead, he hugged Marcos, right there in front of everyone, and said he wasn't afraid anymore. It didn't happen immediately. It wasn't overnight that the whole thing was resolved. But something changed in that hug. A decision was made. We weren't going to live in hiding anymore. We weren't going to let other people's fear dictate what we could or couldn't be. 3 weeks later, Gabriel was working at the local pharmacy. The pharmacist was someone who had given Gabriel a strange look at first. But after talking to Gabriel, after seeing the sparkle in his eyes when he spoke about Marcos, he simply couldn't reject him anymore. It started with a simple conversation. Then it turned into a genuine friendship. And when people tried to gossip there in the pharmacy, he silenced them. "Leave the boy alone," he said, with that calm of someone who has lived through a lot. "He is happy. What more do you want?" The whole town started to change little by little. It wasn't a magical transformation. There were still people who whispered, who disapproved. But there were also those who began to understand. Who saw that Gabriel and Marcos's love was real, was pure, was just as valid as any other love in that place. Marcos's mother, on a Sunday after church, apologized for having doubted. She sat with me and Gabriel on the porch, had some coffee, and with tears in her eyes, she said she learned something valuable. That courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. That her son had been so brave. Luciana, Gabriel's mother, finally came down from the roof she had mentally climbed so many years ago. She started going to social engagements again with her head held high, because now she had someone to believe in. She had a son who, despite everything, had found happiness. And I, Roberto, 58 years old, mechanic, ex-deacon of a church that rejected me, discovered what it really means to be a father. It's not trying to mold your son into something you think he should be. It's accompanying him in who he is. It's defending him when the world tries to say he is wrong. It's being there, always, no matter where he goes or who he chooses to be with. There was a day when Marcos came home and said he wanted to go out with us. Not hidden, not in some faraway place. Just the three of us, going to a friend's birthday party. And when he walked into that party, holding hands with Gabriel, that silence that used to be awkwardness was now admiration. People saw the glow they had together, that light that only exists when two people really love each other. I remember being there, watching my son dance, laughing, being completely himself. And Marcos beside him, always touching his shoulder, his face, letting him know he was there. And I felt something I hadn't felt in many years. Peace. Gratitude. Wholeness. A week later, Marcos called us for a serious talk. He had taken the weekend off and wanted Gabriel and me to get to know his mother and his aunt better. Not just as quick visits, but as family. Because that's what we were now. Family. That afternoon, at his mother's house, eating homemade cake, listening to the stories she told about Marcos as a child, I realized that the question I had asked at that truck stop, on that desperate day, had received its answer. And the answer wasn't just about Marcos. It was about all of us. It wasn't a truck driver who became brave enough to love my son. It was 3 people who became brave enough to love completely. To love out loud. To love even when the world whispered that it was wrong. In the following weeks, as the community started to shift, the tests came. That encounter at the market that changed everything. The whispers that got louder. And then, a day I will never forget. I was on the porch, Gabriel reading, when the rain started. That sudden, heavy rain that can come without warning. Marcos was there too, fixing the fence. When he saw the rain, he came to the porch, soaked, with that crooked smile that was already mine and Gabriel's. But before any of us could speak, the gate opened. Not like a visit, like an invasion. 3 people, 2 men in suits, despite the bad weather. And one who froze my blood. My father. My father, who 6 months ago had said he preferred not to have a son than to have a son who destroyed his own family. Who had turned his back when I needed him most. And now he was here, rain pouring on him, his face impassive. "Dad," I said, standing up, "what are you doing here?" The 2 men in suits entered too, shaking the rain off their shoulders. One of them started talking about community issues and concerns about properties. But I could barely hear. My father hadn't said anything yet. Then Gabriel stood up. In that moment, I saw something different in him. The frightened child had disappeared. There was a man there now, who began to speak about who he was, about having the courage to be seen, about refusing to live in hiding. And at some point in that conversation, as Gabriel laid bare his truth to those indifferent men, my father began to weep. Silently, the tears just rolling down his wrinkled face as he listened to his grandson, because that was how he was starting to see Gabriel claim his place in the world. One of the men tried to continue with his veiled threats, but then Marcos stood up, and Marcos spoke. He spoke about love, about courage, about how he knew Gabriel and how knowing him had changed his entire life. He spoke with a clarity that made even my father stop crying and truly listen to him. In the end, the men left. My father asked to stay. He apologized, said he had wasted too much time. And there, on that porch, while the rain kept falling, the five of us, my father, me, Gabriel, Marcos, and Luciana, who had come out to see who it was, began to build something new. Weeks turned into months. Marcos started taking routes that brought him around more often. Gabriel kept growing, gaining confidence, showing the world who he really was. And I learned that sometimes, the purest bravery doesn't come from heroes or warriors. It comes from ordinary people who choose to love despite the fear, despite the rejection, despite everything. 1 year later, on a clear night on Highway 116, when Marcos was returning from a trip and stopped at the same truck stop where it all began, he called Gabriel. He took a box from his pocket and got down on one knee. And my son, my dear Gabriel, said yes. He said yes to that man who had been brave enough to love him. And you know what's funny? That question I asked in desperation, that question that came from a place of pain and helplessness, had turned into a celebration. It was no longer, who is brave enough to love my son? It had become, look how loved my son is. Look how happy he is. On the night of the engagement party, filled with people from town, including some of the same people who had rejected us before, I was on the porch, watching Gabriel and Marcos dancing together. And Luciana came to hug me, silently, but the hug said everything. Time had healed many wounds, not all of them. There was still room for more growth, more understanding, more love. But we were free, all of us. And that delicate child, too sensitive, that boy who was once afraid to be seen, now radiated. He radiated so brightly that it was impossible to look at him and not believe in the transformative power of love. Not romantic or sexual love, a greater love. A love that says, you are worthy of being loved, exactly as you are. On that last night, lying in bed, I heard Gabriel's laughter coming from outside. His voice mixed with Marcos's, planning their future together. And I whispered a prayer, not to a deity that had rejected us, but a prayer of gratitude, of relief, of peace finally found. Because a long time ago I asked a question I felt was impossible. A question that came from desperation. Who is brave enough to love my son? And the answer had arrived. Not in a magical way, but in a slow, steady, transformative way. The answer was a simple person. A man who drove trucks. A man who, when he saw my son, didn't see something wrong. He just saw someone who needed to be loved, and he chose love. Bravery isn't about denying fear. It's about acting despite the fear. And that man, that trucker with the red Scania, had bravery to spare. Enough to protect Gabriel. Enough to challenge an entire town. Enough to turn a question of despair into a story of hope. The road is long. Life goes on. But now, it goes on with love. And love is, and always has been, the answer to all our questions.